All right, good evening, everybody. What a memorable song. I'll just say a couple of things before I introduce Paul. Yeah, when I taught high school when I was younger, the students thought that was the Shrek Hallelujah. They never heard of Leonard Cohen. Welcome to our event tonight. It's with Paul Elie. We're so happy to have Paul here. And speaking about his very recent book, The Last Supper, and the subtitle, of course, is Art, Faith, Sex, and Controversy in the 1980s. And Paul is well known to us here at the center. We have worked together many times, and we've even traveled together and did some work in Rome. And it's always been a delight to work with Paul. And I'll just read a little brief profile of Paul. This won't really capture all the things that he does, but it's a good start. Paul Elie is a senior fellow at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and a regular contributor to The New Yorker, a magazine of some renown. He's the author of 2 books, now 3. Got to update this one here, Paul. The Life You Save May Be Your Own, An American Pilgrimage. And I'm going to pause right there because that for me was a real life-changing book. Maybe we'll talk about it later, but I was in graduate school working on Flannery O'Connor and The Catholic Imagination. Walker Percy and Dorothy Day and Thomas Merton all were in my book, and poof, here comes Paul's, and it was an anchor and it was a revelation. So that was 2003 from FSG. Reinventing Bach, Music, Technology, and the Search for Transcendence from 2012. And these are both National Book Critics Circle Award finalists. Paul has written dozens of essays, articles, reviews, and prefaces for the New York Times and its book review, and Sunday Magazine, also for The Atlantic, Vanity Fair, and Commonweal. And again, the New Yorker, which I think 40 or more pieces for the New Yorker alone. Here's the 3rd book. It's in there. The Last Supper, Art, Faith, Sex, and Controversy, has been published, and from FSG as well. Paul, welcome to you. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you, Michael, and I have such good feeling about our times in Chicago and Rome and DC, and then an anchor and a revelation. I'll take that for my first book, 22 years on. Thanks.
Yeah, it's just so good, and so many people agree. I mean, I hear my colleague next door, Steve Schlesser, a great Jesuit, loves the book and has taught it many times to his students. We jumped right in kind of in medias res. Let me say it first, thanks to Katie Arnold and Julian. You saw Julian on the Zoom square for their great work, and our center staff of undergraduate interns. I want to thank them all for helping us put this together. So thanks, team. Good job. We began in medias res, as it were, in the middle of things, because we had a prep talk last week, Paul. And I was just I love this how, like, you're writing a book and the creative act and writing and years and trying to see where you're going. And, are you going to lose the book? Are you going to finish it? Is it going to be a different book? And you mentioned to me how kind of in the middle of things in medias res, you found the book, and you found it when you wrote about Leonard Cohen.
That's what happened. So with my first book, when you mentioned The Life You Save May Be Your Own, it was just steady on, 3 years with not a bad day. But by the time I got to my 3rd book, this subject, crypto-religious art, music, film, literature in the 80s, I'm defining the category with the book. So I spent a lot of time doing that, wrote tens of thousands of words. And then the pandemic hit, and my family all stayed up late binge watching HBO, and I went to bed early, which during the pandemic was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and then got up early while everybody else was still sleeping, and kind of dealt with my stuck book. And a couple of things happened. One was that I went back to my earlier work and found this definition of crypto-religious point of view, which is actually in The Life You Save May Be Your Own. But the other was, I started looking at the chronology of the book and realizing that it wasn't what I'd originally intended, a crypto Catholic book. There was too much going on beyond the strict ambit of Catholicism. I found writing three long narrative books, if you know when stuff happened and where it happened, you're halfway there. So I'm looking at all this stuff that happened. Martin Scorsese is in the Brill building where he had an editing studio. Madonna is in New York. And then I realized that Leonard Cohen wrote Hallelujah and If It Be Your Will and Tower of Song and a whole batch of other now perennial songs at the Royalton Hotel on 44th Street in the mid-'80s, at the same time as Scorsese was working out early versions of The Last Temptation of Christ a few blocks away. And when I realized that, the whole book changed for a couple of reasons. First of all, it wasn't just Catholics. You had people really working on the margins of different religious traditions, which is kind of the point of the book. Cohen is Jewish, Buddhist, and fluent in Christian motifs all at once. And the other is proximity. I mean, it's staggering to think that he's writing those immortal songs at the same moment and in the same square mile where Scorsese is making The Last Temptation of Christ. If you're writing narrative nonfiction or biography, that it sends shivers up your spine, and you got to follow that.
Yeah, you think like something's that last part, the proximity part. You think like, God, is there something in the air here? Because then it lines up, on the crypto religious side, and we'll get to that kind of concept soon. But it lines up like there's something, happening. And is it a movement? Not really in a specific self-organized, self-conscious way, but something's going on in the Chelsea Hotel and the Brill building there in New York City. Let's stay with Cohen for a second. You mentioned a couple Cohen songs. What do you have a favorite Leonard Cohen song?
So I didn't really get it at the time. I was aware of Cohen. I read about him in the New York Times. Stephen Holden celebrated his return to live performance. He hadn't played in New York in a long time when he played on, I think it was May 86, May 85 maybe. And he wrote about him in crypto religious terms as a singing Old Testament blues or something like that. But I just didn't connect because of his voice or the narrowness of the recordings. Toni Morrison, who also figures into the book, her goal around the time of Beloved was what she called wide-spiritedness, which is just a concept or a way of putting things that I'm in awe of. Wide-spiritedness, wow. Yeah. So Cohen, with these 80s songs, attained a wide-spiritedness that's a lot of the source of their appeal, I think, to people today. I don't think the recordings registered that initially, but he kind of grew into them in the live recording, like the one you just played. He's got a big band. You can hear the room. You can hear the crowd. You can hear the spirit in a way. So I don't have a favorite, but I cherish the way Cohen kind of grew into his own songs. He's what I call an old soul, which means that he was never really a young man. He had a perennial wisdom and outlook all the way, and the excitement is watching him grow into that music. And so I like, if you start with Austin City Limits in the late 80s and go from there, that's what I like.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You do write about it in The Last Supper. You pull a couple, I think you pull a couple lines from If It Be Your Will, one of my favorite songs. They're like, it's just, I mean, he's a latter-day psalmist or something. He's an old soul. I'll give you a couple lines here. And draw us near. It's all it's a prayer, right? Speaking to the maker. Draw us near and bind us tight, all your children here, in our rags of light. In our rags of light. Then he goes, all dressed to kill. And in this night, if it be your will. I mean, he turns a line so very beautifully.
It's so good. And yeah, he's got he's striking a biblical note, but he's also drawing from the beats. I've read thousands of pages by and about the beats, and I have a certain feeling for them. But I'd never heard beat defined as well as I've actually read it defined by Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
Um, it referred to a certain quality of light inhered in an individual.
Yeah.
This guy tuned into the beats on the crypto religious level when he was coming up in Montreal. And so the lines you just read, they're coming out of David, but also out of Kerouac. And that's
Yeah.
that kind of blend is the whole drama of the book, the way people put the things together in a really unexpected way that I call crypto religious.
Yeah, that's really well put. And how important the beats are. The beats are crypto religious, and there's some explicit. I mean, Kerouac you mentioned, what a Catholic formation, and he sticks with it in lots of ways. Gregory Corso, Diane LaPrima. We'll leave that for the moment. But let me ask you now. First of all, I want to remind our viewers, or announce to our viewers, that we want to hear from you. Last 15. This is going to be from 7 to 8, and so the last 15 minutes we want to read your questions. So the chat is disabled, but please use the Q&A for asking any question you'd like to address, have Paul address, and we'll do that at about 7:45. So there you go. Paul, so then, you were really frank about the writing of the book. I love your structure, and I think it's, there's a poetry in it. You have two parts and an epilogue. Part one is encrypted, and part two is explicit. And then you have 13 chapter titles, and then an epilogue, then some notes and acknowledgement. But and then the 13 chapters, they're marshaling, or no, they're hosting your really unique narrative, historical engagement, kind of your prose style, which are keeping all these balls in the air in a fluid narrative that really works. So how did you decide on that? Is that the way you like to write? It's holding a lot together.
I'm glad it held together for you, because I see its inner coherence, but when you're working on a large canvas, you can't take it for granted that everybody will. So thanks.
Yeah.
If you're writing a long book, my 3 books are 200,000 words each. You have to be audacious. You can't even get through it yourself if you're not trying to do something that's just crazy good and ambitious. I tell that to students a lot, just go for it. So I'm trying to do narrative, portraiture, life and times, criticism, rising action, killer climax. Oh my God, he explained our moment to us. I want it all. And that doesn't mean I got it, but you have to try to find a way to organize that. I see this as an account of a whole outlook that I think is pretty common to people of our generation. I'm 60 years old, was formed in the 80s, thinking that it was the Reagan 80s and how wrong that was, thinking that it was inferior to the 60s and how wrong that was. So going back and saying, well, what was it that we had this outlook that I call crypto religious? So the chapters, which in one sense are meant to move the action forward and say what happened in 1984 in one chapter, and 1985 in the next chapter, or whatever, are also almost like varieties of crypto religious experience. I mentioned old souls. There's certain people who are just old souls. Daniel Berrigan, the Jesuit poet, priest, and activist. Cohen, Czesław Miłosz, the Lithuanian poet who roosted in Berkeley after escaping the communist regime. Sinead O'Connor, my wife, watched some O'Connor videos with me and said she's an old soul. And I thought, wow, you're right. The book is working. One of my categories is actually being applied in a way that I didn't expect. So each chapter is meant to illuminate an aspect of crypto religious experience that we could understand for ourselves. So people go down in the hole and they connect with the religious impulse when things are bad. Some people see themselves as bad, like bad Catholics or whatever. And that's how, Scorsese was portrayed and how Madonna was portrayed in very different ways in the same moment. Some people are devotees, and for me, the devotee to beat all is Bono from U2. He's just so exposed and open, and people mocked him for how how powerful and broadband his search was, but he was just, that was his character. He's a devotee, and still is, really. So that's what's going on with the structure, to try to have it uh, as a kind of taxonomy of different ways of being, and to move the narrative forward.
Yeah, that's superb. I'm just thinking there, I have some funny stories about, well, just how life gives you things. I'll come back to me when it was Seshlov Milosh, that a Berkeley one later, but I can't resist sharing one about Sinead O'Connor, who, when she was recovering from something, not long before she died, she was sleeping on the couch of the now drummer for Morrissey, who used to play for Smashing Pumpkins, I think, some north suburb, great drummer. And so she was kind of sleeping on his couch, and then she wasn't there, and he got worried. He called the police, and they put an APB out, and they had helicopters, everything. And this is in my village in the north of Chicago here, and I was worried about Sinead, the old soul, so I hopped on my bike and was trying to find her. She was ultimately found, and then she just was having kind of some mental challenges at the time. But you're right, an old soul. She famously tears up the picture of John Paul II, and Bono's part of that too, right? There's some weird dialogue going on. Chris Christopherson is coming to her aid. She's grown up in a very kind of repressive Ireland, and was she always misunderstood? Was she before or after her time? How do you think about Sinead today?
You mentioned Christopherson, and that has to do with a not so well known episode in the whole drama of Sinead O'Connor. She came to New York in October '92, not just to be on SNL, but to sing at the 50th birthday concert for Bob Dylan at the Garden, Madison Square Garden. And the song she was going to sing, her favorite, or one of her favorites among Dylan's songs, was I Believe in You. Because Sinead O'Connor, who was born in '66, was 13 in '79 when Slow Train Coming came out, when Dylan's gospel period was announced with that record, oh, Slow Train Coming Round the Bend. So she was formed as I was. Her introduction to Dylan was the Born Again Dylan. And she could hear how great it was without fighting the whole fight about whether he was betraying the '60s or whatever. And I felt exactly the same way. My brother and I loved that record, and we watched Dylan on SNL in 1979 when he came on. So Sinead knew this about herself, and people knew this about her, and they put her on the bill for this 50th birthday party at the Garden. But the week before she tore up the photo of the Pope, she was all strung out. It's a long story, but she kind of had to hide out from the media, who were trying to cancel her, is in the term we'd use today, but ganging up on her. And she went to the concert, and she came out to sing I Believe in You. And these, beer swilling, jean jacketed, baby boom, middle-aged former hippies booed her. 20,000 guys booing Sinead O'Connor, standing there in a beautiful blue dress at the Garden. It's excruciating. So she didn't sing I Believe in You. She sang something else, and an incredible moment was lost. She went to the stage to enunciate her connection with the music of belief through the crypto-religious figure to beat all, Bob Dylan, and got chased off the stage before she could do it. And it just compounded the whole thing that had happened on SNL.
It's a really great texture of a backstory. I think I knew part of that story, not the whole thing. That really is interesting. Mark Knopfler playing on that Dylan album was a little bit, blown away by what he was witnessing, and not always comfortable with it, just because his own journey. But like that album, really, that's what she grew up in. Others grew up with Dylan when he's going from acoustic to electric as being, the great transgression or something like that. Well,
Now, I didn't even go into it, but that record was produced by Barry Beckett, who had produced the great Aretha Franklin records that melded pop and gospel in a way that's better than anyone has ever done in the history of pop music.
So important. I mean, this is beautiful. You've been mentioning crypto-religious, crypto-Catholic. It is a core element or phenomenon that you're trying to account for and observe and take stock of more. Okay, what is crypto-religious broadly? What about crypto-Catholic? What's a good definition for us?
So Czesław Miłosz, the Polish language Lithuanian poet, in the 50s, he wound up corresponding with Thomas Merton, Trappist monk and an author of a best-selling book and also a poet. And Miłosz, who was in Paris, rightly assuming that Merton was a Trappist monk, he was pretty damn Catholic. He was saying prayers in choir in the monastery 6 times a day and so forth, said, well, I'm not like you, I'm crypto-religious. And he teased out that point a bit in a letter, and how it was better for him to not fully state his views because they would be co-opted either by the communist regime in Poland, or they would be scorned by the secular regime, as he kind of perceived in the literary culture in the United States. Flash forward 20 years, and I see the late 70s, 1979, when Dylan turned to Christianity, through to 1992, when Sinead O'Connor tore up the photograph of the Pope on SNL, as a crypto-religious moment. What do I mean by that? The culture was really alive and dense with work that was crypto-religious. It's work that makes use of religious imagery and motifs and language and point of view, but in a way that you can't tell quite what the person who's making it believes, because it's comes from a position other than that of conventional belief. So you're listening to this record, Slow Tame Coming, or watching this movie, Wings of Desire, about angels who want to be humans, or reading a novel, Ironweed by William Kennedy, about this ne'er-do-well who is working through a kind of purgatorial experience, where looking at art like Warhol's Last Supper series, and you're thinking like, wow, what is the motive here? What does this person believe? And in the act of doing that, you wind up asking yourself, well, what do you believe? Well, what does it matter what the artist believes? What does it matter what I believe? And that whole dynamism is really exciting and generative, and that happened over and over again in that period, and I think still happens today when we encounter that work. So that's what I mean by crypto-religious.
Yeah, I think one of the great products, is that the right word? Consequences of the book is you're reminding us, like people say, oh, the 80s and culture wars, sure, Reagan's 80s, in a way, but there was such a vibrant artistic cultural life that was intersectional, to use more of a contemporary word, and way more than I think we give credit for. And I'm a Gen Xer, and I just ate this book alive, because I just, and I was thinking about things in new ways because of, the places you're taking us, the way you're taking us to these places, and the memories you provoked, and then the depth. I haven't quite left the 80s. I still, love the art, but like you just deepened it for me. Who do you think? In your book, there's so many figures who are crypto-religious. I don't want to read them all, but we go from like, Patti Smith, Andy Warhol, Toni Morrison, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Dan and Phil Berrigan, Bono, Larry the Edge, and Adam Clayton and U2, Bob Dylan, Brian Eno, Corita Kent in some ways, Tom Waits, Andres Serrano, Prince, the Neville Brothers. I'm gonna maybe guide us in some questions, but I want to ask you this: is there any need to be crypto religious today? Are there crypto religious artists that are on your radar? How do you think about that concept in 2025?
It's a really good question, and it's pertinent both in itself and also because it kind of echoes the question that led me to write this book in the first place. So when The Life You Save May Be Your Own came out in 2003, I did a fair number of book events. We didn't have video conferencing at that time, but I was doing them in bookstores and on university campuses. And the book is about four American Catholic writers from the middle of the century who kind of figured out a way to be American and Catholic and literary and modern all at once. Dorothy Day, who founded the Catholic Worker, Thomas Merton, Trappist monk and best-selling author, Walker Percy, who won the National Book Award for The Moviegoer and wrote out of a deep experience of the Old South, but also the New South, Flannery O'Connor, who in a short life did these finely etched short stories about moments of grace and kind of walking, talking biblical characters in post-war civil rights era America. So I do these events and people would say, well, who are their successors? Where did that all go? And I think there are a number of strong Catholic writers today. Michael, you and I have talked about Alice McDermott and Phil Cly, and plenty of others. And Richard Rodriguez, for example.
Yeah.
But I felt my answer wasn't really sufficient because I think those writers are working things a bit differently than the people in The Life You Save May Be Your Own. So I kind of wound up asking myself, well, where did that impulse go? And I think it went where I follow it in The Last Supper. And that's not to say that Andy Warhol is like Flannery O'Connor or has deep faith or anything like that. You have to read the book. I take these figures as they come. I don't try to make them any more orthodox or saintly than they were. But in the 50s and 60s, you had people coming from the margins of Catholicism, a monastery, an anarchist movement, the Deep South, and speaking to the Catholic center and to the vital center of American culture. In The Last Supper, you have people from the margins of institutional or formal religion, but right at the center of popular culture, kind of pointing things in both directions, speaking to believers in a really powerful and provocative way, and speaking to a kind of deadness of spirit in the middle of popular culture by introducing this crypto-religious dimension. So now let me get to your question. So what's going on today? It's hard to say. I mean, politics has swamped so much else in culture. That's a big story and what I'm writing about. Another phenomenon is that I think the generation of people that I write about in The Last Supper, many of them came from very robust Catholic and Jewish traditions. And right now, there's a lot of people out there who are what are called evangelicals. They were raised in a thick evangelical culture, evangelical Christian, and they've spent their adulthood trying to sort out where they stand in relation to it. So the evangelical seam is the one that I think is worth attending to. Somebody mentioned the singer Julian Baker to me. She's in Boy Genius, and she's got a lot of solo records. Phil Chrisman in the Chronicle of Higher Education suggested that we should look at her work. So that's one thing. But that's where I would look. And I imagine that we're going to see a similar impulse with people who are raised with a strict form of Islam if they spend time in America and move towards a more variegated culture than the one they were raised in.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, you get me thinking. I was thinking someone like Sufjan Stevens.
Absolutely.
And then the Avett brothers are a little obvious about it. Boy Genius, Mumford and Sons, maybe.
For
Even
sure.
even these guys, these are 10-year-old things, that might be 2015 when they were coming up.
I
Or
just saw Mumford and Sons this summer, and that's absolutely right. And basically, he's wearing a white T-shirt like Bruce Springsteen on the Born in the USA tour.
yeah,
But the uplift that is there in Springsteen sees his concerts as a kind of worldly church,
uh-huh.
and that's what's going on in the Mumford and Sons shows. But it's a notch or two more explicit than it is in Springsteen's concerts, less about the myth of rock and roll and more
Yeah.
about a kind of main line of transcendence per se.
There's even a kind of a weird continuum if you think like about the Grateful Dead, not an 80s band, although they did some 80s things, didn't they? With a touch of gray and all that. But like they're going to the concert, it's got a real kind of liturgical quality, a pilgrimage quality.
And
Uh,
a community that sustained one another and spoke its own language,
yep,
had its own iconography and symbolism.
yep,
And, the Grateful Dead skull and everything is so familiar to us now that we don't really realize that it's not so far gone from the memento mori of Catholic tradition.
yeah,
And Jerry Garcia, who's part Mexican, was tapping into the Day of the Dead, Dia dos Muertos, growing up in the Bay Area, uh, in a way that is, their iconography is so strong that you can forget where it came from.
yeah, yeah. That's great. That's just great. So let's stay with Bruce Springsteen. I have a question about him later, but time is moving, so I don't want to leave him out. Like, what kind of the question I would done is what kind of Catholic is Bruce Springsteen? Is he, no one's, taking a litmus test or checking under the hood about the degree of his Catholicism, but I've read his autobiography. You have. Like, how does he frame it in his own words, and how do you read it?
That's a great question because he frames it in a way in his autobiography that's a little more articulate than it is in his music. So in 1988, and this is in the book, the Reverend Andrew Greeley, the best-selling novelist and sociologist and commentator on Catholicism,
Chicago guy.
yep, uh, wrote a piece in America magazine, the Jesuit magazine, declaring in a weird way that Springsteen was a Catholic Meister singer. He didn't make any reference to the music or to me, the strongest crypto-religious aspect of Springsteen's whole presentation, which is the quasi-liturgical aspect of his live shows. But just going on the lyrics of Tunnel of Love and a couple of other songs outside of that record, he made this case. He did exactly what I try not to do with the book, which is try to like claim somebody and like baptize them in a newspaper column. But he was onto something, and he was way ahead in detecting that. Walker Percy picked up on that a bit later.
Yeah.
So Bruce Springsteen was raised Catholic. He has a sense of the transcendent and of the need to connect, which we would call like the body of Christ, or the fratelli tutti, Francis calls it, the brothers and sisters all. That's as strong as anybody alive in this country at this time. I mean now Bruce Springsteen has got that going on like nobody else. And sometimes it's expressed in religious terms, and sometimes it's expressed in rock and roll terms, and sometimes it's expressed in American terms, sometimes it's expressed in Jersey terms. But the Catholic terms are not to be discounted. When he says, "I believe in the promised land," that's pulling in both directions. It's to people who have a religious background, he's speaking their language. And there's a lot of people who are being introduced to that language through Springsteen's music.
Mm.
It's there in the river. It's there. There are people who are Springsteen scholars who could track all this stuff. And it's really there in a particular way in the Woody Guthrie songs that he did for the Woody Guthrie tribute record in the late 80s, and that are described in detail in the book. I Ain't Got No Home is Woody Guthrie. And I Ain't Got No Home, that's a migrant, that's a worker, that's Christ in a way. And he hits it so perfectly that they're all there, but none of them dominates, and it's not special pleading or dogmatic at all.
Yeah.
I love this aspect of Springsteen, and he brought it out in the autobiography so that we could understand it better. But it's there for the hearing, if for those who have ears to hear, as the saying goes.
Yeah, I'm going to jump into. I'm noticing a comment here. Peter Weiner, thanks, Peter. He says when Springsteen was doing a one-man show on Broadway, those were darn successful, weren't they? That's an amazing thing. When Bruce was doing this, he ended the night with a recitation of the Lord's Prayer. Paul, thoughts? And Peter says it seems he was much more willing to be open up about this part without the E Street Band being around.
That's really striking. And now Peter, who's an old friend, one of my oldest friends, knows this period experientially as deeply as I do, and and I have a lot to learn from him, and I'm learning on this right now. It reminds me in a way of what happened when Salman Rushdie it was targeted by the Ayatollah Khomeini on February 14th, 1989. The fatwa came down. Rushdie was supposed to be, condemned to death for writing the Satanic Verses. So on the pub day of the book, a lot of writers got together in Lower Manhattan, and they all did their thing on behalf of Rushdie. Robert Stone, I think, said, "We are all Salman Rushdie," echoing John F. Kennedy. Leon Wieseltier of the New Republic echoed Voltaire and kind of how Rushdie had turned the terms of radical Islam back on themselves. But Gay Talese, and this is where I'm going with this, Peter and Michael and everybody else, an Italian Catholic novelist, he read the Lord's Prayer at that event. I mean, boy, those were different times, that the Lord's Prayer was still a gesture of unity and not of sectarianism or of culture war or of Christian nationalism the way it's become. And Springsteen understands that. He comes from that tradition where that's still a unifying act. And I love him for it, that he's not, willing to let the culture talk him out of that. And it's very moving to hear it mentioned as a coda to his one-man show.
All right. That's great, Paul. And thank you, Peter. I'm glad. That's great. You guys have a friendship. I'll note here, I'm threading in some other people now, and I have, I'll keep it charging nicely. I think I have a way to do this. Marion Wernicke observes Alice McDermott, Colm Tobin, and Niall, I think it's Niall Williams, are current writers in the crypto religious spirit. That's her observation. What do you think?
I think it's true. I don't know Williams' work too well. I was at FSG when his first breakthrough was published.
Yeah. Did he write This Is Happiness? Is that his? I'll look it up.
He's got a bunch of books, and my sister Janet loves his work, and many of my colleagues at FSG loved his work.
Yeah.
The question with Alice McDermott is whether she's cryptic, and I'd love to ask her that. I think she thinks of herself as a Catholic writer, full stop. And so, I mean, even Flannery O'Connor was uneasy with the term Catholic writer. So these terms feel different if you're the actual writer than if you're the narrative writer, cultural historian like I am, kind of applying them. So I think it's stronger or more self-evident in some of Alice's work than in others. And Charming Billy, Billy is a saint in a way, but you're not supposed to get that until you get to the end of the book. And that phenomenon happens in other books of hers.
The Ninth Hour is so explicitly Catholic, come on.
Tobin was, I would say, almost anti-Catholic in his early work.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's happened with Pope Francis' pontificate is that people who felt that they were out in the outer darkness have come closer. Scorsese has come closer. Patti Smith, who was never a Catholic, has drawn closer she just did a concert in Rome the other night, and Pope Francis's confidant Antonio Spadaro was there with her and presented to her a guitar made from wood of one of the boats that migranti have traveled in from North Africa, and they had a real moment about that.
Ah,
So Toybin has really gotten his instrument has become much more subtle in its registry in a very
ah,
powerful way that is owing a lot to the opening that is represented by Pope Francis. And
I
now,
think that's
yeah,
really yeah. Pardon me, Paul. I think that's really astute. I like his instruments become more refined. However, I love how you put that. And I had read this summer. I think it's called "Guest at the Banquet." It's collected columns or kind of short form journalism, and he's got a great essay that's salutary mostly on Pope Francis in there. Let's kind of we're stick with crypto religious. We were having not a chuckle, but we were comparing, like you could have called this the variety of crypto religious experiences in the spirit of William James. That could have been a title, but you landed on the Last Supper. Now, why did yeah? So was it Warhol, his work, or why the Last Supper?
so the whole question of how do you define a period is something that anybody who works in the field that I'm working in has to figure out. The 90s, the 80s, Generation X, Generation Z, this stuff is just marketing at this point. New decades are announced with new product lines and new shows on Broadway or whatever in a way that's really false. So the challenge is, how do you characterize a cultural moment in a way that feels legitimate? So if you're working in a literary way, which is the way I am, you're using imagery, you're using metaphor, you're using symbolism, and you're using a knowledge of the moment. So I mentioned earlier that the two Saturday Night Live episodes, 79, Dylan going on as a Christian, and 92, Sinead O'Connor, a devotee of Dylan, going on as and doing a kind of crypto-religious gesture by tearing up a photograph of the Pope. That's a useful chronological way of bracketing the moment. What's going on then? I see that moment as both an end as a beginning. It's the end of Christianity's like long dominant position in American life. The country had become much more multi-religious beginning in the middle 70s due to immigration, especially from South Asia. I saw this on my paper route when I was a teenager. There were many Bengali families that I delivered to. The country was changing, but the culture took a little while to catch up with it. So it was an end in that sense. And that's what made these Catholic prelates so anxious. They were losing their position and they didn't know what to do about it. So they struck out in a hostile way to try to legislate the preeminence of Christianity because they couldn't do it persuasively, many of them. At the same time, it was a beginning. I think it's a beginning of the moment that we're in now, which I think of as the post-secular age, which is related to what I just said. When Christianity's dominance is no longer established, different religions and different forms of Christianity and no religion at all are all kind of contending in public space for the same attention. And that's where we are now. And that really began in the moment that I characterize in the book. So an ending and a beginning at the same time. Well, isn't that the Last Supper, right? The Last
Yeah.
Supper is the end of Jesus's time with his disciples, and it's the beginning of Christianity. So when those things all converge, as a narrative writer, you can like feel the pressure of your imagery speaking to you and saying like, use me. So I used it.
That's brilliant. I love that kind of the Last Supper as a liminal space. It's all of those things, and it's also it's the origination or it's the institution of the Eucharist, and and the Eucharist brings all these kind of tensions, and I mean, of course, it's the real presence in that theological sense, but it navigates all the tensions that we are addressing.
And of course, the book has as a central episode Andy Warhol's making of dozens of different images of the Last Supper.
Over 100, right? 150 maybe. Is that right?
It's an incredible number, and
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the 120 isn't that much different from 121. It's like a different shade of pink or whatever, but the multiplicity of it is part of the effect. And he, the line on Warhol is that he was facile and that he used assistants and that he just made a few images before he put some coke up his nose and went beyond camera. But if you look at his diaries, it's not true. I mean, and I had to be persuaded of this myself.
Yep.
He had this $1 million commission to make the Last Supper that he took, he said, for the money. But as the deadline approached, he had to get down to it because they had to ship the work to Italy, where it was going to go on display on a square right across from where the actual Last Supper of Leonardo is. So he's feeling the pressure. And meanwhile, he's looking around. He's in the gay world. He's gay, but not totally declared. But the world of painting and fashion is full of gay men who are contracting HIV and dying of AIDS. It's like a Last Supper. These men go out together knowing they may never see one another again. And so Warhol's totally attuned to the times. That's his thing, right? So
the sign
he takes the times and puts it into the Last Supper and really gets serious and becomes an old soul after all, is the way I put it in the book.
And he's at church, at mass every Sunday. The pastor of St. Vincent Ferrer thinks he sees them there every day, sitting in the back, and he's always working in the soup kitchens as well. I mean, so the guy's much deeper, and of course his family in Pittsburgh, there's a real deep relationship, and he claims, I'm a religious person, says Warhol.
It's been a little exaggerated. I mean, he went to church for 10 minutes some weeks. But that's still, when you're Andy Warhol, it's kind of amazing that he went at all. It's sort of like, I'm amazed that Pope Leo and his brother talk every day.
I know.
Staggering. I mean, he different time zones. He's been in Peru. He's been in Rome. He's got a packed schedule. They talk every day, that it doesn't matter if it's for 2 minutes or 10 minutes, right? So if Warhol's getting to church in the way that he's getting there, that's significant. We're not counting the minutes.
No, we're not counting the minutes. We're not trying to baptize him, but he had a genuine relationship with the life, with a life bigger than his own. Let's look at, we're really getting close here, but I want to get some things in. I'm tempted to talk about Morrissey. Oh, you see the Warhol over my shoulder, by the way.
I do. And who's he with?
That's Tennessee Williams.
No kidding.
That's the different Morrissey, Paul, from The Factory, who's a filmmaker. I think he made Spike from Bensonhurst, but before that, he made all these things with Warhol in the 60s and in the 70s. And then there's guy Rod LaRod. I don't know him, but that's the name of this guy here. But that's Tennessee Williams, the playwright. Okay, I want to talk about the other Morrisseys, Stephen Morrissey from Manchester, but maybe not so much, and all those Irish Catholics up there and their imagination in the Smiths. But I really want to talk about this trifecta: Brian Eno, Daniel Lanois, and then the guys in U2, Bono and Larry the Edge and Adam. How do you think about those three? Those worlds collide in lots of different ways.
It's amazing. I mean, and that when you asked earlier about the present moment, those people all had what a sociologist would call, like a thick cultured Catholicism coming up. Bono, the Edge was Presbyterian, so I should say Christian, really.
Yeah.
Bono was had one parent who was Catholic and one who was Church of Ireland, Anglican Communion. And Eno was brought up in a family that had been Catholic since before the Reformation in southern England. And Daniel Lanois was a French-Canadian Catholic. So they were versed in the canon, right? Then the 60s and rock happened and they all went in their different directions. U2 were so young that they were on the tail end of it. But they found their way to one another. U2 were so young, they'd already made a whole bunch of albums by the time they were 25, and they were looking for someone who could take them to a new place, but could also educate them, really. And that's what Eno did. And Eno, a famous conceptualist, is categorically averse to getting too involved in some of the craft of recording. He wants to be an enlightened amateur, but he'd found this partner in crime, Daniel Lanois, and introduced Lanois to U2, and it all clicked. They wound up riding around in a car with a cassette with rough mixes of some new U2 songs on the cassette deck and kind of singing along, and they just took it from there. And it was an incredible partnership. They made what I can't remember if it was Eno or Bono. I think Bono called Hymns to the Future.
Oh, yeah.
And this combination of the thick Christian iconography and the new high-tech state-of-the-art recording was an unmatched combination, and one that still hasn't been equaled in some respects.
Excellent. And I'm glad you mentioned the thick, descriptive, sociological questions of, you can read these guys in this way. And we'll come back to them. But speaking of sociologists, I have a question here from my colleague, our colleague, Jesuit Father Paddy Gilger, who is an excellent sociologist by training. And he goes back to crypto-religious, and he says, hey, I'm taken by your use of Milosh's idea of crypto-religiosity, and I enjoy how you use it in the text. But I found myself wondering whether it is something sustainable. In other words, as this religiosity becomes more hidden, more detached from the institutions that generate it or generated it, can it be sustained? If so, what would it look like?
No, it cannot be sustained. And in the epilogue to the book, crypto-religious outlook depends on institutional religion. The two are are implicated together, and in some ways, what's happened in the last 15 years is that I think in the Catholic tradition, because of Pope Francis, he recognized the open-ended aspects of the Catholic tradition and sponsored them, and in some ways embodied them himself. And that enraged the traditionalists in some respects, but was also responding to the genuineness of the material that in my book and the kind of and the culture that it called forth. And so the institution, of course, is necessary. And I'm a Catholic. I belong to the church. I receive the sacraments and so forth. I recognize the cryptic aspects of my own belief, but I don't think they're sufficient. I think these two things are bound up together.
All right, so come back to Eno and Lanois, and I love Eno's work. I mean, all these brilliant albums from the '70s, three of the best ever in the '70s. I love Lanois' solo work, and he works with Bono, and he's got great music, and they're great producers. Lanois and Eno were talking once. This is it, like, so Eno may be less religious, but but no less theological. So on Lanois' "Here Is What Is" album, he had some kind of video supplementary material, and Eno and Lanois are talking, and Eno starts to say, he talks about beauty, right, and how people can do something. He's like, he goes, don't ever forget, Eno says, that beautiful things grow out of shit. And so when I'm feeling pretty down, I feel like, hey, I can do something here, right? Because something that's majestic and life-giving has come out of a very nasty situation. Is that crypto-religious? I don't, how do you think about it? It's theological, it's natural, it's all these things. Is it crypto-religious to think that way?
I think much crypto-religious work operates in that way, but no, I don't think it's specifically crypto-religious.
Yeah.
Flannery O'Connor said that the business of the fiction writer is putting list slippers on clerks, and she was quoting Flaubert. And if you don't want to get down into the muck of things, you better not try to be a novelist.
Yeah, got to get dirty.
At the beginning of my time in journalism, I interviewed Laurie Anderson, and she was doing, she did a kind of holographic character that was a kind of twisted version of herself for a PBS series. And I asked her, well, is that harder than, playing an electric violin or playing a violin with blocks of ice under ice skates and as they melt, or doing Oh Superman at a giant arena? And she said, look, all art, you're all making something out of nothing or making something out of something else. So in that primordial level, it's all equally challenging. And that's kind of, I think, where you're going, that
Yeah.
Eno really understood the kind of combinatory aspect of art. And that's what he helped you to understand, that they weren't just strumming guitars and singing into microphones. They were making epic sonic collages where the sound of a banged stick treated in the right way, can resound through Wembley Stadium and have 100,000 people singing along, that kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's really good. I think we have time for two more. We might go over just a couple of minutes, but we have to do it because we got to hear about uh, Toni Morrison and James Baldwin. We could speak volumes about each, but there's a connection there with them in the '80s. Can you comment on these great artists, Tony and James?
So Baldwin, he lived in several places. He lived in the south of France. He had an apartment on the Upper West Side, and he taught part of the year in Ohio, I think. On the Upper West Side, he came to know Toni Morrison. And Toni Morrison was in New York plenty, and she also had a house in Rockland County, and she taught at SUNY Albany. So there were these writers kind of moving around, and they were in touch with each other. Baldwin died 63, I think, astonishingly young age in retrospect,
Yep.
in 87. And he was given a memorial service at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine on Amsterdam Avenue and 112th Street, on the bluff overlooking Harlem, where he had grown up and set his earliest work. Meanwhile, Morrison had published Beloved. Long story short, 6 months after Andy Warhol had been celebrated with 3,000 people at St. Patrick's Cathedral, Baldwin was celebrated with 3,000 people at St. John the Divine. And a lot of them were the great Black writers at the moment. They all saw each other there. And so when in that time, Beloved didn't receive the National Book Award, a lot of them got together and decided, well, what's going on here? We have to advocate for our writer. And one of the things that emboldened them to do so was an interview with Baldwin, published posthumously in the Village Voice, where he said that he hadn't gotten the National Book Award for Go Tell It on the Mountain in '52 because Ralph Ellison had gotten it for Invisible Man the year before, and they couldn't have Black writers get it 2 years in a row.
God.
So he finished his career never getting a major literary prize. So as an act of redress, a lot of great Black writers and scholars and intellectuals kind of organized a campaign to present the case for Toni Morrison in the New York Times. Yeah. That's what they did. It worked. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and the rest is history. But before all that happened, Morrison gave a remarkable eulogy for Baldwin at St. John the Divine, celebrating the religious dimension of his work that was always there, even after he felt like the church left him. But in many ways, he moved away from the church he'd been raised in as an adult.
That's great. I recently watched James Baldwin debating William F. Buckley in Oxford. There's footage on YouTube if you want to see it. Baldwin is amazing. Buckley can be good, not so good there in my view. Didn't Toni Morrison win something for Song of Solomon? I thought she.
Maybe she won the NBCC. I mean, she was a successful writer.
Yeah.
The story I tell in the book is that because she was published in mass market paperbacks, a lot of women readers, she wasn't respected. But she wrote these essays that explained what she was trying to do, that help people to understand her, and they're phenomenally good.
Yeah.
Unspeakable Things Unspoken is one of them, and it gives the title to one of my chapters called Unspeakable.
Exactly. I love Toni Morrison. I mean, just Chloe, her confirmation name is Anthony, and she kept it for, you know, and
We went to St. Anthony of Padua Church in Lorain, Ohio.
yeah,
That's why she took the name Toni, because
yeah,
that was the name of the church.
that's great. Okay, I would love to talk about Nick Cave. I'm gonna just everybody needs to look at Nick Cave's growing in his own, like he's becoming kind of a would be priest is not the right word, but his spiritual maturity is becoming kind of a compass for many people who are disaffiliated. I love, if you see the funeral mass, I'm blanking on the name of the church in Ireland, but for Shane McGowan of the Pogues, that's some good stuff to watch as well with
It's a
Glenn
remarkable
Hansard.
document. Yeah.
Isn't that great? Yeah, and right on the altar there, the priest is up there. It's in the context of a funeral mass. Some eyes were rolling. I thought it was great myself. Last move here. We got to talk about Scorsese to kind of close the evening, Paul. That's a really important film. Nikos Kazantzakis' Last Temptation of Christ that Scorsese puts in. He'd been wanting to do it for some time, and I don't know if you have your book there. If you want to read it, I want to hear just some of your writing to close on page 324. You're really speaking about like what Scorsese is trying to do with the person of Jesus, and it's right in the middle of the page. With this picture, he's exploring, and then to stop with the word selves about 6 lines down. You got it?
I'm on the page. Let me find the
In the middle after God and fully man.
yes.
Yeah.
So Scorsese took as a starting point for The Last Temptation of Christ the Christian doctrine known to him since his days as an altar boy, that Christ is fully God and fully man, the human and divine nature subsisting together in the person of Jesus. And Father Gilger, I hope I got that right. With this picture, he's exploring what that means. And that inner voice makes Jesus' humanity unmistakable. It's a kind of neurotic voice of Willem Dafoe that doesn't sound like an authoritative, godlike voice. It sounds like an anxious person.
Nasally, you say? Nasally
Yeah.
voice? Yeah.
In Western civilization, to be human is to have an interior life. That's how we define humanity. To live in the gaps between thought and expression, desire and fulfillment, anticipation and regret, and be alive to echoes from the past and portents of times to come. This life, the interior life, is the space of the drama of human existence as outward conflicts spark the conflicts within ourselves, leading many of us to be what I call controverts.
Yeah.
Prompted by the Kazantzakis novel, the films he loves, the arc of his own work, and his crypto-Catholic faith, Scorsese has made the interior life of the Son of God the site of a human drama. He dares to depict Jesus Christ as a controvert, inwardly at odds, like the rest of us.
I think that's masterly work. You want to, it's almost like you don't want to beat it with a hose because it just stands by itself. But maybe the word controvert, which comes up in this book many times, say what you want about it, Paul. I'm glad to hear you read. I love the way you write. That's a great representative text right there.
Well, thanks for saying so. And I mean, if you're writing narrative, you have to earn your way to that stuff. It's not like you park that insight and you're just going to pop it in. You figure something like that out by writing the 323 pages that go before it. Yeah. So then when you get there, you're like, wow, that I can fit, my story is telling me something. My vocabulary is yielding insights. And so I'm glad that they feel like insights to you.
They do. Let's close with, yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned the culture wars early in our conversation. Yeah. The whole effort of this book is to take back this work from the politicians and restore it to the artists. A lot of it was notorious because some congressmen whose names we can't remember now, spent 4 hours doing photo ops and agitprop events on the House floor or whatever, and then moved on to the next thing. And that constitutes an episode in the culture war.
Yeah.
And it's the lives, Scorsese committed his life to this film. Nick Cave has committed his life to the kind of thing that he's doing with a similar lack of irony, and that's what I respond to in it. So to take it back to the artist, controversy is not what happens when the League for Catholic Civil Rights, gets agitated about Sinead O'Connor. It's what's going on in her life and in her negotiation with religion from the time when she's a teenager up until she winds up being booed off the stage in Madison Square Garden. She's controverted. She's divided against herself. She's registering the complexity of religion at a personal level and not trying to solve it in some facile way, but to express it. And that's what I mean by controversy in a deep sense.
There's an honesty there. This is really stark. You think of the Catholic League as like one person, and there's like a boogeyman, like, that's saying that's not how you do religion. And O'Connor might be the way how you do religion. A person maybe after Jesus's own heart, like Cohen's David, that we open the hour with. Paul Elie, last word for you.
Yeah, what you said just sets me up perfectly. I mean, it's not just the artist, it's us. This is what we're doing with our lives. Many of us are in the church or in institutional religion. Some of us are on the margins. Some of us are have turned away. Some of us are in an inarticulate place where we don't quite know where we stand with regard to this stuff.
Our children, Paul, that whole universe.
Yeah.
Of people. Yeah.
But it is happening, and to register that and to respect it is something like what Pope Francis said when he meant that we should go to the margins.
All right, beautifully done. What a great conversation. I enjoyed it. I'm a little sad that Julian's not piping in some applause on the applause meter. Let's go for a Zoom applause.
Thank you.
Thank you all for showing up. Please share the video with your friends. A great discussion. Paul, we'll see you soon. And everybody else, thanks for tuning in, and God bless you. Take care.
Thank you so much, Michael.